Hi, and welcome. You're listening to the X22 Report. My name is Dave, and this is episode 1310B, and today's date is June 19th, 2017, and the title of the episode is The Elite Can't Wait. The event is now being pushed. Let's get into the economic collapse, political, and geopolitical news. Now, as we can see, the corporate media, even Trump, he was tweeting out there about the investigation and how they were investigating him about the firing of James Comey. Well, it turns out, and this is coming from his lawyer, from his legal team, they're saying that Trump is not under investigation for the firing of FBI Director James Comey. He never was. And this whole thing is, once again, propaganda. And we can see that Trump's lawyer said many took the message as a confirmation that Trump is under investigation. And he said the tweet from the president was in response to the 5 anonymous sources purportedly leaking info to the Washington Post, referring to a recent story about special counsel Robert Mueller allegedly looking into whether Trump fired Comey last month in an attempt to obstruct an investigation into alleged Russian meddling in the U.S. election. Trump is not afraid of the investigation, his lawyer said. There is no investigation. And we can see right now that the corporate media, they are continually pushing their agenda, and they continually use propaganda. Now, CNN was out there, and they were putting up this poll, and they were hoping to get a completely different response, because the poll said, should Trump be investigated for obstruction of justice? Now, they put this up there, and there were something like 2 million or so votes. And it said 70% said no, he should not be investigated for obstruction of justice because there was no evidence whatsoever to support this. Now, CNN, they were saying, well, this poll is really not scientific. We don't know how this happened. They were trying to explain away why this happened, but it completely backfired on them because they thought in their minds, the way everything was happening, that it was going to be 70%, let's investigate Trump, but it turned out to be the opposite. Because when everyone looks at the propaganda, we're starting to realize, and we've always realized, the rest of the country and the rest of the world, they're starting to realize that everything that's coming out of the corporate media is turning out to be lie and propaganda, and it's just made up. And once people start to realize this, the corporate media, they're going to have a very tough time convincing the world. They're already having a tough time, and it's going to get worse as time goes on. Now, what's very interesting is that we're seeing this whole breakdown of the Middle East, and we can see the elite are very nervous and worried. Right now, Saudi Arabia and Russia, well, they might be planning a natural gas type of cartel where Russia and Saudi Arabia, they'll be joining efforts to work together, and Saudi Arabia might supply natural gas to Russia. And we can see that by cooperating with Russia, Saudi Arabia could kill 2 birds with 1 stone. Because the strategy with OPEC, Russia could be solidified while at the same time it holds power over the world's gas sector. And Moscow's support for Saudi Arabia plans will not only benefit the kingdom's natural gas development, but also maybe corner Qatar fully. A combined Russian-Saudi power play in global gas could change it dramatically. And we can see already that Qatar right now is moving closer and closer to Iran and China, where they'll be trading their gas not in dollars, not in euros, but in yuan. So what is happening right now? We're starting to see the Middle East completely break up and look in a completely different direction because they realize the U.S. dollar right now, it is at its end game. They understand that the deep state, well, it looks like they might be losing the battle. Now, the deep state's not going to give up. Don't get me wrong here. We can see already with the events that happened earlier today, they are going to try to push many events, but we can see the Middle Eastern countries, they're getting nervous and afraid, and they're looking towards Russia, they're looking towards China, they're looking towards Iran, and it looks like they're going to deal outside of the dollar. This is the beginning, which means the petrodollar is going to be pushed to the side. And we know why this is happening, because the system is coming to its end. We're at the end stage of the dollar as the reserve currency of the world. This is why Trump has been talking about trade. This is why everything has to change at this point. But the deep state, they don't want to give up their power. They want to remain in control. We can see that NATO, well, they're holding defense drills simulating Russian invasion of the Baltic states. And they're out there having these drills. And NATO official described the area as a choke point in the Baltic area. And basically what they're doing is they're having these drills, they're training and saying that they need to protect Poland, Lithuania, Croatia, and they're having these exercises. Now, the only reason they're having these exercises is because eventually what they want to do is they want to bring us to war. This has been their end game for a very long time. Now, the Afghan army, they're out there and they've said that they've killed 700 Islamic State fighters. Now, they've said this before. They've claimed that they've defeated and virtually wiped out the Islamic State, but they always seem to come back. Now, we understand why. Because the deep state is in Afghanistan. They control the paid mercenaries. They know exactly where the Afghan army is going. They know exactly where they're going to be, and they know exactly how to tell the Islamic State to move into a different area. Now, of course, they believe they destroy them. They believe they hit them, but all they do is they keep moving into different areas. And this is what's been happening for a very long time, not just in Afghanistan, but out in Syria, out in Iraq, and out in Libya, and many other areas. Now, McCain is out there, and he's freaking out because he wants to know what the strategy is in Afghanistan. It's not because that we didn't have a strategy in Afghanistan. He's very nervous that the strategy is going to mean that they're going to go in there and get rid of the Islamic State. He's worried that the strategy is going to be, let's go after the paid mercenaries. Let's go after the poppy fields. Let's go after everything that they established over time. That's what he's worried about. This is why he's carrying on out there that we don't know what the strategy is, because he's very nervous. He's very afraid of the strategy, because the strategy is not going to be beneficial to him and to the paid mercenaries, which he's been supporting for a very long time. Now, we see out in Mosul, troops have launched the final mission where they're driving the Islamic State out of Mosul, and it seems like the Iraqi forces are now cleaning up in their country. And we need to understand something very important here, is that the deep state, the neocons, the central bank, they never wanted these wars to end. They never wanted the Islamic State to be beaten. They wanted this to continue on forever and ever and ever. And if you ever listen to all these individuals saying that these wars are going to last forever, there'll never be an end to these wars. We can never defeat fully the Islamic State, because they never wanted this to end. Because again, the entire industrial military complex, they make a lot of money off of this. And they don't want to destroy the Islamic State. That's their paid mercenary army. They need them to continue this operation of terror. They need this to bring these paid mercenaries into other countries, to have regime change. This is why they've been saying that they don't want this to end. But we can see that times are changing now, where the Islamic State is being pushed back. They're being destroyed. The paid mercenary, they're on their last leg right now. And this is what the deep state is very worried about. Out in the Strait of Hormuz, we see Iran and the Chinese naval forces. They're participating in joint drills. And of course, this is right in the area where the U.S. sails the ships, where they always say Iranian patrol boat is looking to attack. And of course, these are just little tiny boats compared to the major ships that the U.S. has. And it's ridiculous because the U.S. is sailing right outside their territorial waters and sometimes crossing into it, then moving out of it to provoke them. Now we have China there, and they are having drills in this area. So we can see right now things are changing very slowly. But again, the deep state, they are not yet finished. Now at this point, you can see the deep state, they are going all out. And you can see that they're making a major push to bring the world to war. And it looks like they're trying everything they possibly can think of. Now, Saudi Arabia, this is coming out of the Saudi Information Ministry. They're saying that the Saudi Royal Navy foiled an attempt by Iran. They captured Revolutionary Guard Corps. They had explosives on the boat, and they were headed towards their offshore oil fields. Now, let's think about this for a second. Iran is now in Syria because the Syrian government asked Iran to come in and help out with the terrorists within the country. They did the same thing with Russia. Iran has not started a war in 200 years. We know that the United States has been trying to provoke Israel, Saudi Arabia, the rest have been trying to provoke a war with Iran for a very long time. And it just so happens that this boat with explosives and Iran's Revolutionary Guards, they were approaching the kingdom's offshore oil field, and they were going to blow it up. And they said they intended to carry out a terrorist act in Saudi territorial waters. To me, this seems like a false flag. How would this benefit Iran right now by doing this? This would bring Iran into a major war with Israel, with Saudi Arabia, with the United Arab Emirates, with the United States, with the UK, and the rest. Would this benefit them in any way? Absolutely not. There'd be no reason to do this. They're working with Russia right now. They're working with China. And this is not how Iran operates. And we can see that they were trying to set this up as some type of false flag. And by stopping it, they're trying to say that, yes, Iran is getting ready to use terror on our offshore oil fields, which makes no sense whatsoever. Now, they might have done this, and they're broadcasting this out there because Iran fired missiles into Syria and hit their paid mercenaries, the Islamic State and Al-Qaeda. So the Royal Guards, they fired 6 missiles from the west of Iran across the border into Syria near Deir ez-Zor, and their target was the Islamic State command base, and they hit the base. Now, most likely, this is why Saudi Arabia was most likely out there saying that, they're trying to hit us and blow up our oil fields with a terror attack, because they saw what they did and they're trying to basically get them back or try to get this war started. To me, it looks like the deep state right now, they're trying to get this war started. And we can see that the Middle Eastern countries, well, they're starting to point fingers at each other of who did the 9/11 terror attack. We see the United Arab Emirates, well, they're pointing towards Qatar, saying that you're supporting the 9/11 terror attacks. Qatar is pointing fingers back at the United Arab Emirates, saying, no, you were part of the 9/11 terror attacks. Well, when we look at the whole entire situation, we start to realize that all of this was done by the U.S. government, Israel, and Middle Eastern countries. This was a group effort. They were all responsible for what happened here. Even the United States government, the deep state, to get us out into the Middle East, to get us into Afghanistan, to get us into this fight against terror, to remove our rights. And now they're starting to argue amongst each other. But something happened very, very big today. And the corporate media, yeah, they kind of touched upon it, but then they went over to what happened in the UK with a van running into individuals in a mosque. And they also went to Paris, where a car rammed into a police van, and they found out there was a lot of explosives in there, and I guess that was going to be used as a false flag. But these two things just so happen at the same exact time, where a U.S. jet shot down a Syrian jet. And the timing is unbelievable. And that, to me, is one gigantic distraction of what is really going on in Syria. Now, an American fighter jet on Sunday shot down a Syrian warplane that the U.S.-led coalition said attacked its allies in the fight against the Islamic State group in the in the country of Syria. Now, think about it. The United States government central bankers, they are in Syria illegally. There is an elected official running the country. His name is Assad. It's a sovereign country. Russia was invited into the country to help fight the terrorists. Iran was invited into the country to help fight the terrorists. The United States, the UK, Germany, and the rest were never invited. The United States is flying in sovereign airspace, and they shot down a Syrian jet. This is an act of war. In any other country, this would be an act of war. But Syria and Russia holding back. Because believe me, the deep state wants them to do something. They want this war to start. This is why they did this. Now, the Russian Defense Ministry stated that Russia would track the U.S.-led coalition warplanes and drones west of the Euphrates in Syria. The Russian Defense Ministry said the Americans are testing our patience, and this is exactly what the deep state wants. And we can see right now that this is an act of aggression. Lavrov is saying, listen, the U.S. needs to respect Syrian sovereignty. They can't be doing this. This is a sovereign country. And he calls on Washington to respect Syrian territorial integrity and the country's sovereignty according to the UNSC 2254 resolution and other documents. And we see right now, Tillerson was out there, and we have to remember this was a couple days ago, that the United States government does not have authorization to fire upon the Syrian government, the Iranian government, or the Russian government at all. And they did this on purpose because they knew there are rogue elements within the Pentagon, within the government, that are trying to start a war. Now, think about what just happened here. The deep state flew in and they hit a Syrian jet. How did they do this? Because everyone's out there, well, don't they have the S-300, the S-400s? Aren't they monitoring the airspace? Well, what happened was the U.S. plane, which shot down the Syrian Su-22 over Raqqa, was a carrier-based FA-18. That means the American plane took off from the carrier George H.W. Bush, flew over all of Russia's radar and missile sites in western Syria, shot down the Syrian Su-22 in Raqqa, and then flew right back over all the Russian anti-air sites. And you're saying to yourself, how did they do this? The reason Americans could do so without any worries is because they announced the flight to the Russians through the deconfliction channel, but not their intention to be shooting down a Syrian jet. So they said they were going to be flying a jet through this area. But what was the real intention? Well, they told us. We knew the plane was going to go there. The systems were brought down. They weren't going to track them. They weren't going to fire upon them. Now, the Russians have dropped the deconfliction channel and announced that they will paint all U.S. aircraft in Syrian airspace, which means the entire airspace is now locked down. Now, the deep state, if they fly a plane into this area, it will be shot out of the air. Now, is Russia and Syria actually going to do this? Well, they said they will paint the target. It doesn't mean they're going to be shooting it down. This is the warning. We're going to see how far the deep state's going to take this. But we know from past actions, Putin, we see the Syrians, they know what will happen if they actually shot down a U.S. plane. It would be war. And the deep state would make sure that we go to war. Now, we still have bases in Turkey, the Incirlik Air Base. We also have the U.S. Air Base in the Kurdish-held northern Syria, which is completely illegal. And again, those won't be flying near or crossing the Euphrates because they're not in that area. And they still could use those planes, but we can see most likely they're going to be painting all the different jets, and they'll be tracking all of them to see where they're headed, what they're going to do. Now, the U.S.-backed Syrian Democratic Forces rebels, they vowed to retaliate in case of a Syrian army's attack on their position in Raqqa. Basically, they're trying to maintain their area. And we can see that the Syrian government, well, they don't want the rebels there. They don't want the terrorists there. They want to control that area. That's their country. And, of course, the Pentagon came out today. Navy Captain Jeff Davis said that, yes, pilots will defend themselves, but we are not looking to get into a fight with Syria. We are looking to attack the Islamic State, and we'll do a better job in staying away. Now, it looks like they're trying to calm the situation down. The rogue elements in the deep state, they don't want the situation calmed down. They want Trump to do something. This is why CNN is out there, and I believe they have this article where they're saying, wow, he doesn't mention any of this on Twitter, because what they're trying to do is they're trying to trap him into this, where they're pushing him into a war. That's what they want him to do. They want him to go to war for them. And they're trying to push him into this type of situation. Now, we find out that there's more details to what happened here. And it's not what the corporate media is saying. It's not what the deep state is saying. What we're finding out is that the Syrian Su-22 plane that was downed by the U.S. Navy FA-18 Super Hornet in the area of Topqua in the province of Raqqa. Now, according to other information, the Su-22, it took off from the airbase, and 15 minutes after it took off, well, it was shot down. It didn't carry out any type of airstrikes. It wasn't even getting ready to have any type of airstrike. It was just shot out of the sky. This reminds me of when Turkey was instructed to shoot down the Russian jet, because if it came very close to the border of Turkey, even though the Russian jet, Turkey knew the Russian jet was going to be there. They had no air-to-air missiles. They only had bombs that they were dropping on the Islamic State, and it looks like the U.S. kind of instructed Turkey to shoot down the Russian plane at that time. And this reminds me of the same exact thing that just happened here, where the U.S. warplanes, they fired 2 missiles. One missed. The second one hit the Su-22 in the rear. And this, again, was to provoke Russia. It was to provoke Syria. And I have to say, Russia and Syria, a lot of restraint over all of this. Now, the White House has come out and they said that they're keeping the lines of communication open with Russia. And I'm sure Trump is speaking to those officials in Russia, calming the situation down. And I'm sure they're formulating a different type of plan, because they realize, and Putin has come out and said it, listen, the individuals that are running the country, they're the men in the dark suits. Trump does not have full control of the country. Many people believe that he's the president and he has full control. No, we still have different factions that are running the country. Now, something else that's very interesting is that the Wall Street Journal, they just outed Israel, Saudi Arabia, and the rest of the Middle Eastern countries, where they came out and said that Israel and Saudi Arabia and the rest had been supporting the Syrian rebels in Syria. And they came out to say that the Israeli army is in regular communications with rebel groups, and its assistance includes undisclosed payments to commanders that help pay salaries of fighters and buy ammunition and weapons. And the journal also reports that Israel may be funding up to 4 other rebel groups which have Western backing. The groups use the cash to pay fighters and buy ammunition. Now, what's very interesting about all this is Assad has claimed this in the past, and the corporate media called him crazy. Now, think about this. The corporate media, if they're using their fact-checking back during that period of time, the corporate media, the U.S. government, and everything they've been saying, they would say the facts are that Israel is not supporting them. But the facts are false. And we can see today, and I don't know why the Wall Street Journal came out and did this, but we can see things are rapidly falling apart in this area. We're starting to see which countries are actually supporting the terrorist groups. Now, we've known this all along. This is not really a surprise. But we can see right now, we have the Middle Eastern countries arguing with each other, pointing fingers at each other. They're being called out and supporting the groups. We can see they're making deals with Iran, with China, with Russia, moving away from the dollar. And what's very interesting is that all this happened where they were downing the Syrian jet, and we had these two events, one in London, and of course we know the Brexits are going on, and we notice a lot of false flag events happening during this period of time. We also have the one in Paris, where there was supposedly this car with a lot of explosives. They hit a police van in Paris, and it contained a lot of explosives. I guess they were preparing to do another event. And we know that all these false flags events, they have been used to distract everyone from what is really going on. And it looks like the deep state is now in overdrive because they cannot wait any longer. They're backed into the corner, and we're going to see a lot more happen. They are not finished. They'll try other events like we've seen in Syria. They'll try other events in Europe. And most likely, they will try the big one when everything does not work. They can't get the war started. They will go all out. Listen, everyone, thanks a lot for listening. Be well, be safe, and especially be prepared. Thanks a lot.